Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to another live stream of video game news for Friday, December 20th. As always, we'll start with a warm-up section and then we'll jump into the news. This is the first time I've said that part, but you know what? I really should say that part because inherently I do always have a warm-up section and I do always go on for longer than I think people are expecting, at least. Although today, in fairness, as we're getting closer to December 25th, Christmas, not really too much to talk about. Still watching a lot of streaming services. As perverted as it may sound, I can't help but highly recommend a movie on Amazon Prime called The First Nudie Musical. It's a 1976, I guess for 76 you might call it softcore porn, but really it actually is a movie with a story and everything. It just happens to have some softcore, well, by modern standards softcore. It technically I guess is hardcore. It does show some hairy lower genitalia of women, but from a distance certainly. But yeah, the musical part and the making of the musical is the whole thing. It's kind of like The Producers, if The Producers was a little bit less focused on the music quality. I wouldn't say the music is great in the movie, but yeah, it was a fun ride certainly to watch. And then let's see. What other junk though that I'm watching? Like I watched the anime Imminence in Shadow. It goes nowhere and really is dumb. It's just a pointless one on Hulu, so I'd say skip that. I saw the first episode of a Korean horror series called The Light Shop, and that caught my interest. What I liked about the first episode in particular is it started slow, whereas so often if you're going to have a horror series where there's monsters, by the end of the first episode you would have people finding out that they're the chosen one, that they have special abilities to fight the monsters, that there's some kind of organization that fights the monsters completely, and none of that really happens in the first episode. In fact, you don't even really get any kind of explanation as to what the monsters are. You get the feeling throughout the vast majority of it is that they would just be ghosts. That being said, they were described as strangers, and I wouldn't call them traditional ghosts by the end of the first episode, because there's just something different about them, the strangers. I'm sure I watched several other things not video game related, and still watching a ton of YouTube, although noticeably, while I have been cleaning house, which is still what I do occasionally off and on, although I am not accomplishing as much as I would like. That I am slowly making progress. I'll do something and then I'll take a break, and then I'll get distracted and play Pokemon TCG Pocket, which I guess we're in season 2. They just kind of quickly went in and added the number 2 to the awards. So it seems like almost every month or so there's going to be a new season event, although maybe not. It just depends, I guess, how quickly they can put out new card packs, because it seems like they definitely are going to have the events follow by a couple days the release of the card packs, which isn't the worst system. Give people a few days to buy the card packs when the new card pack expansion is released, then have some new single player content put in, and then put in a new tournament, which the new tournament has now started, it is back to the first tournament rules where you just have to get a certain number of wins. You don't have to get a certain number of consecutive wins. But I heavily suspect that the next tournament will be you have to get 5 consecutive wins to get to that medal. But I can already tell that medals are going to matter very little in the game because they're just going to come very quickly with every new season coming. I can't really say anything about Memento Mori. There's a new character being released, and an event around that new character, but it's all kind of same old. I started watching another show on Amazon Prime called Bedlam, which looks like an old BBC show that I think I've watched before. Inherently, I think I probably watched a lot of these things on Netflix when Netflix had them, or I watched a lot of these things when they actually aired, and that I really do have just a whole lifetime of history of watching way too much TV. Particularly since there was periods in my life when I wasn't playing video games as much. And that's where video games are so helpful, is that one video game could easily be 60 hours, but it's a struggle to find a TV show that you actually like that would go that long. And that I do notice as I'm going through Prime Video looking for something new to watch, or Hulu or whatever, it's the algorithms in particular have made it way worse to find something new or different. It is really just recommending the same things over and over and over again. Same is true for YouTube. Where there's just not a good reason for that. I would be really screwed, frankly, if I didn't have 3 or 4 different sources of entertainment. Because if I, for instance, had no Hulu or had no Prime Video or didn't have video games in particular, I would be bored out of my mind. Although it is worth pointing out that most humans don't have that problem, because most humans either watch a sport or have some other long time consuming hobby, and I just really don't have that other than gaming and watching TV. I would probably become a reader at that point if I lost one of my major forms of time killing and start reading books. But yeah, a lot of people watch football as in soccer or cricket, and all of those are notoriously time consuming experiences. Even if you're taking a shorter experience, which with some other sports you can usually double up and watch 2 or 3 of those shorter experiences. And I wouldn't say basketball is particularly shorter than football, American football, and baseball is super long. One thing I probably decided, and you probably will notice it too as far as just when I decide to stream, is that I've also pretty much decided that there's no point really in honoring my alarm clock. I already have it set fairly late at 10 in the morning. I definitely am not a poor schlub that is waking up at 5:30 in the morning or 6 o'clock or even 8 o'clock. But yeah, I just don't see too much of a reason when I've got no other meetings or anything to stay up to really just wake up at 10. I'll try and keep it somewhere like that where the alarm clock still goes off, but in a lot of cases I think I am just gonna roll over and sleep until noon. which is closer to my preference. My real preference would be to wake up somewhere around 1 p.m. in the afternoon, and I don't think that that's even that weird. I think if all things else being equal, people could choose, they probably would want that. But you'd want a time when it is generally warm, generally well lit, to be the time you wake up. You wouldn't want a time where it's still slightly, the sun is still slightly coming up, or you wouldn't want to be waking up when the sun is going down. In most cases, you don't want to wake up when it's cold. Yeah, it's just a completely different feeling. And yeah, I imagine most people would be way more awake and efficient if we did shift the times. And there's just no good reason for schedules to be the way they are. It's all based mostly around the schools deciding to start at 6 in the morning, 8 in the morning, which was based on a farmer's schedule, which was based on working outside with no source of external lights, which isn't even the reality now, really. Farmers could easily have lights on their tractors and trailers and their equipment, and they could easily work in the middle of the night, although maybe that would scare animals or disturb, or maybe they really can't see everything, but mostly I imagine they just don't want to pay for what would be an overpriced lighting kit to put on a tractor. But yeah, long since has it been a case that the vast majority of kids going to public school, though, worked on farms for their families as cheap, free labor. So school systems sticking to that mentality is ridiculous, despite the fact that every single scientific study in a sense has told school systems and school administrators that it is not healthy for kids to be waking up that early, and inherently every teacher knows it's not healthy for kids to be waking up that early, and that the vast majority of the first and second period classes in every school has large amounts of sluggish kids, if not downright sleeping kids. And there's something to be said for just being ruled by fiat and having a federal government law just say, you know what, we're just changing the start time. We're going to abruptly change it. They do it every year with daylight savings time. They might as well just do it every year. In the case of the United States, they probably couldn't actually pass a law, or they probably wouldn't succeed in actually passing a law to change the start time of schools, but they certainly could, without going through the House of Representatives or Congress, make a executive order that says there would be no federal funding for schools unless they change their start times. And certainly it's the kind of thing you could say, we'll do it in 10 years. We'll do it in 5 years. We'll do it in 8 years, 9 years. After a presidency would be completely done, you could at least create a date for people to slowly transition to. It wouldn't be that hard. And you could do it in increments even. You could say all schools will start 30 minutes later than they start now. Minimum is 6:30. Next year, all schools will start 30 minutes later after that, and you could just do it over the course of a longer period of time. That would allow any job to adjust, as far as any employer to adjust to make up for the changes there. Alright, well, I think that's probably enough warm-up section. We can see here on the SteamDB concurrent charts that Marvel Rivals is still doing very well. Path of Exile 2 also doing very well. Marvel Rivals is more of an Overwatch game, I learned, but it seems like it has like a Splatoon functionality when you're playing as one specific character, the land shark character. So, or maybe there's a specific mode, event mode that's happening there, but overall it is more Overwatch than anything. And yeah, I can see why fans of Overwatch, people who would have been fans of Overwatch 1, would jump over to Marvel Rivals, considering how Overwatch 2 really has failed to hold the attention of those fandoms, and they screwed themselves by shutting down and not supporting Overwatch 1 for longer. And that's kind of, for those kinds of games, a really dumb mistake. Like, once something's popular, you can really never shut it down, and you probably can never really have a sequel to it unless it's been decades. But yeah, Marvel Rivals doing very well. Banana here we can see is falling down to 15 still, however, getting more players than Call of Duty is, which maybe we finally are at a point where things like Helldivers 2 and just Counter-Strike 2, PUBG, and just other general styles of games, it's finally started to destroy the momentum of Call of Duty. Yeah, let's see. Don't Starve Together, It Takes Two. Baldur's Gate 3 is in the 24th spot. I do suspect that since I imagine kids are out of school right now, these numbers of players will go up, and certain games may just move around a lot. With the exception of Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, which is not even on this list, there hasn't really been too many new games other than Marvel Rivals. Yeah. It is interesting, certainly, as far as momentum, is that Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel is still beating out things like Blairtro. Of course, it should go that way, because Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel is player versus player, where Blairtro, I believe, is single player. And inherently, this list, as far as the 24-hour peak concurrent player, will always be lower, because single player games will be lower. Deadlock did get an update, but I just don't think the enthusiasm is going to be for Deadlock in its beta state. And I don't think Valve even really wanted there to be a massive amount of enthusiasm. They may be more than happy to just have a peak of 21,000 players while they're still slowly working on Valve time to finish that game and actually release it. Now, this 21,000 players may be, once the game actually does come out, just professional level players that will ruin a launch experience for anybody new. And I don't know how you really fight against that, other than not having public betas in the first place, which maybe would have been wiser for that style of game. Yeah. Not seeing a huge amount of big changes, though, as far as the peak concurrent. And it does look like on my chart something has changed here. This Crosshair X seems like it might be new. Deadlock is way down here now. And yeah, we're getting very close to the end of the year, where theoretically it would make sense to start to reset all these numbers. I think that will happen automatically. I think just January 1st this chart will change and the peak number will be at 100 points instead of 5,294 points, although it still probably will be about the same chart. Although who knows, things like Once Human or Warframe may not show up on the chart starting January 1st because they may have been more flashes in the pan. But while my chart does show a longer scale as far as what people, or either humans or bots, are playing using this SteamDB concurrent peak player base, it does lock into a fairly rigid system fairly quickly. Because I can't imagine there's going to be too many super popular brand new games that have even 3 weeks in which they are in the top 100 as far as the peak player base charts go. And so as things like Counter-Strike 2 will just probably be in the top 3 position for the next 52 weeks, it will still probably be in the top position. Yeah. Which that connects to a thought certainly I'm having, as far as I've always, I think fairly accurately, thought that there's a very wide variety of people who play games, and that there really isn't a gaming community in general. And certainly I think that is the case when you look at the concurrent player base, is that there is just a very large populace of people that play Counter-Strike 2 and nothing but Counter-Strike 2. And at one point there definitely was a very large populace of people just playing World of Warcraft and nothing but World of Warcraft. And those are just very different people than the same people, than the people who are only playing GTA, or the people who are only playing Palworld, or people who are maybe playing a little bit of each game. And the only thing we actually have in common in those groups is that we all play some kind of video game. Of course, the community gets even wider when you have people who play solitaire on their phone, and they are being called gamers and considered gamers, and there's no reason not to call them gamers. It's just the fact that we need to recognize that gamers is just a very broad, generic term. It's probably closest akin to calling somebody a Christian around the world, is that there's many people who will self-define themselves as Christians, even some people who are actually following the Jewish faith or Islamic faith often will call themselves Christian. But when you really start to get down to the many schisms throughout the history of Christianity, that the truth is that there's a lot of variety there. Some Christians don't consider Catholics Christians. Some Catholics don't consider Protestants Christians. Eastern Orthodox Catholicism may not consider Roman Catholics Christians, for all I know. But yeah. And then when you start getting down to really deep sects amongst Protestantism, most of them don't agree with each other on major factors, and some of them, I imagine, don't consider other Protestant sects to be Christian. So that is effectively, I bet, the best example of what being a gamer is. Which is interesting because I saw certainly an example of that, in which there definitely are on Twitter cosplayers who are lewd cosplayers that really are just trying to show as much cleavage, if not straight up showing toplessness, while having a loose video game character persona over it. So with the Witcher 4 trailer, I saw a lot of either new cosplays of cosplaying girls dressed up as Ciri, or old ones being reused, which there certainly was a lot of them. There's long since been a popularity amongst that cosplaying and that attractiveness, which would assume that there is a subset of fans of lewd cosplayers dressed up as Ciri. So it creates an interesting dichotomy as far as there are gamers that do like Ciri as a character, as at least a object of desire character, and they definitely like that even in Witcher 3. So if there is a true argument from gamers from the Witcher 4 trailer that they didn't like Ciri as a character, which is, I'm not sure what anybody really was making as an argument, that would be a different group of people, certainly. Now, there might be some overlap in that they didn't like the fact that Ciri looked realistic instead of looking hypersexualized and beautiful in the trailer, but even that seems like that would be a small group of people too, and there very possibly are just 4 or 5 different groups of people that are saying 4 or 5 different things there. If any of those things are even true, I question. I think a lot of it is just trolling and joking. Yeah, Ciri as a character has been liked for her appearance, and she certainly was designed to be pretty, like all the characters in Witcher 3. Even Geralt was designed to have a rough masculinity to him, despite some of them having scars. The Steam Winter Sale, let's move on, is going on, and apparently it's a case where Valve hires different artists every year to do all, or at least multiple art things for that year, for each sale. So the anime delivery girl character, which you can barely even tell it's her in this case because she's not wearing that same outfit. The animator who did all the previous ones has said that this is the last one she's doing, and so we're not going to see the cat, and we're not going to see the anime delivery girl. Here you can see is her jacket. So we've followed the entire journey of her, which didn't really have any real narrative to it other than she seemed to be delivering things, but that's not the worst idea since this is just general art. I wouldn't even say I like this art. The lighting here and the effects seems to be overwhelming. The ability to actually see the characters. I would have been fine if they had decided to stick with her and just kept her in that same role, although it would get increasingly difficult to do something different. But if Valve wanted Steam to have their own little mascot character, that'd be fine. There is now, I suppose, room for a new animator to make a new character that might be more beloved, but that is going to be a tall order, and it may be that they just go in a different direction. Noticeably, it is worth mentioning that I do not recall any consistency in any of the art in previous years. This feels like this is the first year where there was actually any consistent character or any focus at all on the art. And so if I was Valve, I would be saying, let's just hire this person and keep them on board. That we will be known as the place that has a little bit of visual storytelling every sale. And I don't think any of the other stores or shops really have anything to compare to that too much either, so you would be ahead of the curve. There is an argument, though. A new artist could create a new character, see what worked here, and double down on it. But if it is just a case that Valve only wants to hire somebody for a 1-year contract because they're being incredibly cheap and they don't want to get connected in the long run with one character, it would be difficult to do a winter sale and have it all be focused around a character from a video game. That would be a little difficult to consistently negotiate. Plus, it would be very weird if you're having a Christmas sale and then you have Diablo 5's characters or Call of Duty characters. And that would be the problem most of the time. Not really in the position right now where I could be buying any games. 1, because I'm not playing games, and 2, because I really shouldn't be spending money on games. And I think for the most part, that is the entirety of this year for me. This is a very bright pattern of snowflakes on blue on background. Not anything terrible there. They once again are giving away stickers instead of trading cards for going through the discovery queue, which tells me that they are just done with trading cards being a thing during sales. They're pushing Steam gift cards, but I bet there isn't any discount on gift cards. They have a different art style for the Steam Deck for the sale, making it feel more cartoony instead of live action, which maybe there is a point to that idea. Noticeably, seems like they are targeting more Asian people. That's what I would say this looks like, is an Asian family playing the Steam Deck, which is weird because I don't think the Steam Deck has released recently in any Asian countries. It has been available in Japan, certainly. The Steam Replay, we've already looked at mine, so we don't need to go through that again. And it does look like they've once again, for the sale, changed the layout, getting rid of that very complicated chart and instead breaking it down. Here's your top sellers being its own separate thing, and then popular new releases. It's like the chart, but they've expanded it so you can actually see all the pictures of the games all at once. It is scrolling down a lot, certainly. Like, I can't even get all of the thumbnails on screen at the same time. But yeah, I would say it is probably better to go this way. Although inherently we still have, even with my settings, you still have popular upcoming games like Lust Trip getting more coverage than I imagine Valve would like to cover it, which that definitely highlights how there is just a bullied into silence group of gamers out there that is fairly large, that either will keep an eye out for adult games and we might actually play them and purchase them. They keep getting made, so clearly they're making somebody some money there. Inherently, I imagine adult games are very short, and for the people that buy them, they go through them like tissue paper, and they're just constantly buying newer, more and more. Then I imagine while we scroll down here that there's just going to be more games promoted. One thing I wanted to say as far as why it's taking me so incredibly long to clean house is A, it was a mess, but B, it's totally, yes, the case that I could just hire people to throw everything in garbage bags and throw everything away, but that's not really accomplishing the goals I'm looking for. First of all, I want to know what I have. I want to evaluate whether something is worth being kept, and that just takes a lot of brain power and thinking. I'm reorganizing my kitchen, just rethinking about where every single dish should be. Is it the most practical place for this thing to be, or is it just in the way most of the time? And so yeah, this is not just inherently decluttering, it's completely reorganizing, or perhaps organizing for the first time. Yeah, certainly I could just throw everything into a garbage bag, but the problem with that concept, and I imagine that's how a lot of people make a big mistake, is that they throw away a bunch of stuff without looking at it, without thinking about it, and then they end up just rebuying that stuff. And well, there is the idea that if you don't use it in a year, you just buy it again when you do need it. As far as decluttering, that is wasteful and that is expensive. And certainly if you are buying things again, over and over again, then that is going to be very expensive. And not particularly helpful either, because you're not flexing the muscle, the mental muscle you need to organize and decide where something belongs in the first place. So when you do buy something a second time, you're going to just put it in a pile, and that pile is just going to get bigger and bigger as you haven't really learned or thought about where you want things to be. Yeah. And it does look like here on the front page you can just keep on scrolling forever. And it does look like, once again, it's pretty much the same games being promoted as usual. It's just that there isn't that many new games out, and the algorithm is just not going to dig deep. There's not going to be a point where you scroll down really, really far down and then you get suggested a game that has no reviews and has been only played by 5 people, which I think there is a significant number. I wouldn't be surprised if about 40% of all the games in the Steam database are like that. And those are just effectively shadow banned games because the algorithm would never recommend them. It would instead just start going in circles recommending the same things a second time, or more than likely you'll just scroll down and it will eventually say we got no more suggestions that we can suggest. Yeah, the only way you can really change the front page algorithm, I think, a little bit would be to just purchase a ton of games. Just purchase everything on the front page. But yeah, that would be difficult. certainly to pull off, unless you're just infinitely rich. Yeah, notice some of these games, it's suggesting like aren't even on sale. So if during sales only games on sale were promoted, that might be helpful. But the algorithm clearly isn't even programmed to do that much. Yep, I guess I'll leave it at that. So despite the fact that there's a new link on the Steam Deck, on the front page it just takes you to that same live action video, although it does seem like this page is different for the sale. All very black, just pure black background, and it is worth checking out to see if the recertifieds are still in stock. This is just the same page, otherwise they just tagged the advertisement video to the top and then added this part here to actually promote some games, which does mean you have to scroll fairly low before you actually get down to a buy button, which maybe there's an intentional reason for that, in that they want you so hyped on how many games can be played on the Steam before you actually see the price. Because I wouldn't be surprised if there are just some people out there that would think a Steam Deck might be $200 and be thinking that it would be in lines with what they probably don't even recognize as too little of money for even a Switch. Of course, if the next Nintendo Switch 2 came out and it was $200, instead of probably being closer to $300 or if not $400, they could potentially eat the lunch of the Steam Deck concept. Although it kind of doesn't matter either, because the same argument could be made no matter what. If the Switch 2 came out for $50, people could still say, well, you're going to be paying $70 for every Nintendo game, so they'll make up the difference after 8 games, or just pick a number there, and then almost certainly the Switch 2 is not going to be $50. Not unless they can figure out some kind of cell phone service you have to agree to, which maybe that would be the case. Certainly that same concept could be applied to the Steam Deck too, if there was a cell phone contractual service feature there you were paying for. But I don't know how many people would really agree to those kinds of services. So as far as the refurbished goes, everything is sold out right now. I am not super surprised there. If these ever come back into stock, which I think they will very rarely, I would definitely recommend grabbing an OLED version if it comes back into stock as soon as possible. Worst case scenario, the 512 LCD version, maybe even the 256 LCD version might be worth it. 64, definitely not. Now, the fact that all the refurbished are sold out in other companies may indicate that they were getting rid of stock and that they're planning on releasing new hardware. I don't believe that's the case here. I imagine that a lot of refurbs are probably going to GameStop and other sources instead of being sold directly on the website. Yeah, and gift cards don't seem like they're on sale, but you would be kind of double dipping if you were doing gift cards and they were on sale. anyways. And then also, on top of them wanting you to shop, they want you to vote for the Game of the Year awards. So let's go ahead and do this, and this will give us stickers, I believe, or things towards a badge. They've gone with kind of a fist icon, robot hand. Okay, do I think Black Myth Wukong deserves the Game of the Year? No, because I think it is just too short. Again, if I was going to do my own awards, I'd probably have multiple winners in every category based on probably sales numbers, if not based on popular vote. I could see popular vote after a certain number of sales numbers nominating things and trying to balance both out. I would argue that Helldivers 2 probably deserves to be Game of the Year, or because I think the vast majority of people probably are playing that and having fun with that. Bolero being single player probably has a little fewer places. Stalker 2, probably fewer people playing it. Warhammer. So just number of players, number of playtime, I'd say give it to Helldivers. And it would be nice, certainly, if you could see how far the voting is going, but they won't do that because then you would potentially be influenced to change your vote, which you can if you want to. VR Game of the Year award, I have no idea. I don't even know what Maestro is. So I would have to assume Five Nights at Freddy's Help Wanted 2. Labor of Love award, I think you'd probably give it to Baldur's Gate, but it might be Elden Ring. Kind of crazy to give it to like No Man's Sky. None of my nominations, by the way, I think have made it, nor did I think any of my nominations would make it, which definitely kills a lot of the fun as far as having people nominate Game of the Year or Steam Awards when your nominations are highly unlikely to be in the top 5. Best game for the Steam Deck. Well, I haven't played the Steam Deck, but I would assume Hades might be it, but overall, Bolero feels like it's probably the one. Better with Friends. Could be Satisfactory that wins here, could be Helldivers 2 again. Let's not double up on awards though, and let's go with Palworld. Just Palworld winning any kind of award is kind of a spit in the face of Nintendo's overly litigious attitudes. Outstanding Visual Awards. You have a game called Never, I don't even know. Silent Hill 2, just being a remake of a game. Hades 2. Nine Souls. Let's go with Metaphor ReFantagio though. Try and get at least one Japanese game. Most Innovative Gameplay Award. Satisfactory, I guess. We'll be generous there since it actually came out of it. Games You Suck At Award. The Finals. Dragon Ball. Black Myth Wukong. Ghost of Tsushima. Tekken 8. Let's give Black Myth Wukong an award there. Best Soundtrack. Interesting that Fate Stay Night here made it. And yeah, I can't really say anything about soundtracks for any of these games since I haven't played them, so let's give it to Fate Stay Night. And then Outstanding Story Rich Award, I would assume Fate Stay Night should have been in that one. A game called Mouthwashing, I've never even heard of. Like, how did I miss this game? I probably just looked at it and then immediately dismissed it as just a weirdo looking game. Story Rich Final Fantasy 16. Let's give it to Stalker 2. Hello. Sit back and relax is almost certainly going to be web fishing, but maybe it would be the TCG card shop simulator. But I would say web fishing is probably more relaxing. So you do all that. And that just gave me a bunch of stickers. These are chat stickers that we just got. Again, just really doubling down on chat stickers as a thing. So I guess I did my democratic duty as a gamer on Steam to vote, but it's hard to feel like your vote ever counts in these cases, particularly when absolutely none of the nominations I picked, I think, really affected anything. I probably did nominate something like Black Myth Wukong in a couple of categories, just out of trying to be right at the end. But I definitely would like to see a different system here, because Steam in particular has a unique issue in that the number of potential nominees is just way higher than any other kind of awards show. When you think about the Emmys or the Oscars or like Tonys, any of them, they really have a very finite number of potential things to consider. There's only so many movies, only so many TV shows, only so many Broadway plays that will come out in a year. Whereas video games, and that number is hugely higher comparatively. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if there's more than 50 movies you would have to watch to give away movie awards to potentially consider all of the games that came out on Steam. You would be playing, or at least looking at, 50 games every day at minimum, every day of the year. Anyways, so that's my Steam Awards picks, and that is, I guess, technically the end of the warm-up section. So let's actually get into video game news here with the Video Games Chronicle headlines. I don't know if my macro really ran correctly today, so actually I'm fairly certain it didn't. Come, let's look at that being a factor. I have a plugin that would have been disabled had the macro run all the way, so we may find that a disaster has happened here and that not all links got opened. But also, it may be a case that very little was missed or nothing was missed, because we are also less than a week away from Christmas, and it's not like there's going to be a ton of news, video game news happening. But let's see. So this BAFTA Game of the Year is free for the next 24 hours. So that would be here, which tells me that this story, and this story were not open, and we can adjust for that. The games industry will only have room for one non-Nintendo console next gen, it's been claimed. Either Sony or Microsoft will struggle mightily with their next console, research firm predicts. Well, in a lot of ways, that's kind of been the case, that there always has been a race for second compared to Nintendo doing its own thing. And for most gamers who play consoles, you're either going to be first Nintendo or you're going to be not Nintendo at all. And I think most people are going to be first Nintendo. Um, and I think it might be more region based, certainly, because it's been that way in Japan always, that it really has just been the Nintendo Switch and then an also ran of the PlayStation, with the Xbox not really being a competition at all. Certainly, it does seem like Microsoft is already embracing that idea and moving towards that idea, with the idea that Xbox is just going to be a brand, and any number of devices potentially are going to be your Xbox. And so you won't have to potentially buy a proper Xbox Series X like console to play Xbox games. They may have also internally decided that if they aren't making Series X level of hardware, they could potentially reduce the budget and make less visually demanding games in the future, which isn't the worst thought for Microsoft in particular, although it does mean that they're not going to directly compete with PlayStation. But if all of a sudden the next generation of games from subsidiaries owned by Microsoft are AA level graphics instead of AAA level graphics, or AAA graphics instead of trying to be quadruple A level graphics and budget, then maybe that is the right wise move. If all of a sudden over half of all Xbox players are playing it streaming on a Fire TV stick, the graphics don't have to be that good, but then you also lose the graphics as a sales point. But I think abandoning graphics as a sales point makes a lot of sense anyways, because they just can't really improve that without increasing the expense way too much. Of course, that would all have to be next generation games, because right now Indiana Jones and the Great Circle is doing the exact thing, the exact opposite of that idea, by looking amazingly good and demanding ray tracing. And yeah, I definitely look at it as a possibility that the Xbox would struggle mightily. It is also possible that the PlayStation might struggle mightily, in that they don't really have exclusives and system sellers, and they barely have games at all, and somehow Sony has managed to succeed with that. Of course, you could get the best of both worlds and have Microsoft and Sony just merge together, and they would be a huge powerhouse then, if there was no longer that competition. But I don't know how that kind of merger would really occur. Ahead of Sonic 3's release, a Sonic 4 movie has been greenlit. The Sonic movies seem to be still doing very well. DICE's biggest award is going to be given to an industry visionary at Nintendo, Nintendo of America veteran, to be honored with a DICE Lifetime Achievement. Interesting that they're not actually naming the person until you get way down here. Don James, someone I've never heard of, has been at Nintendo of America for 40 years, which may not mean much as far as what he really did. Let's see. Oversaw multiple departments, so it looks like he's been in management this whole time. Which, yeah. I guess the question there is who deserves Lifetime Achievement Awards or not, because it definitely seems like, to me, the only time you get these kinds of awards given out, it's given out to upper management, maybe upper middle management, and it never really seems like it's given out to anybody who would be an associate level game developer, somebody who actually was creatively inputting on the development of games. Again, if I was going to make my own website that was like an IMDb for video games, and I was going to have an award show associated with that, I definitely would want to be targeting associate level employees for lifetime achievements, and I'd want to give it to them before they died. Because yes, I have seen a few awards given to people who die, often people who die suddenly, who are more creative input type people, but when it is usually somebody alive, it's almost always somebody who's been in management. And yeah, I have to also point out that Nintendo of America really is still just a subsidiary of Nintendo of Japan, that localizes and does very little otherwise. So the real game development is almost always being made by unnamed third-party, second-party developers of Nintendo, often in Japan, often directly under the influence of Nintendo of Japan. Nintendo of America, and even more so Nintendo of Europe, is really just a puppet of Nintendo of Japan as far as I see it. The BAFTA's 2023 Game of the Year is free for the next 24 hours. Epic Games is kicking off its free Christmas games with Vampire Survivors. Okay. I'm not even gonna bother this year to try and get any of those games on the Epic Games Store account, since I'm never gonna play them on the Epic Games Store. Let's see. Here we have another one of these pictures that's out of center, but whatever. The Nintendo Switch 2 will reportedly fix the original's biggest flaw. It's going to reportedly eliminate stick drift and come with a more powerful dock. I'm not sure how powerful the dock really needs to be. I don't recall people complaining about the dock being wimpy. And what do they mean by more powerful? The complaint I had heard about the dock was that if you weren't extremely careful, it would scratch the front of your screen as you slid the Switch in and out of the dock. And as far as eliminating stick drift, that is definitely something I've heard people complain about, and definitely believe it's a thing. So if it does have Hall effect joysticks in it, that would fix stick drift, one assumes. But I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't actually have Hall effect joysticks in it, and this is just a made-up rumor. If they do have Hall effect joysticks, this would be the first major console to have Hall effect joysticks included. I don't think Hall effect joysticks are inherently that much more expensive than regular joysticks, but I do think in mass, in bulk, they probably are more expensive by a few pennies, and they may be more difficult to source overall. It may just be difficult to have that many made in time. The dock apparently is weighted for 60 watts instead of 45 watts, which really just feels like that is a natural improvement of basically all USB charging devices these days, is that if you are getting a good USB charging brick these days, it's going to have a tendency to support higher wattages and higher transfer rates as far as current or voltage, which USB-C auto negotiates. My new phone, which I still haven't gotten around to setting up, I'm just not making it a priority, has turbocharge from, it's a Motorola phone, and when I plug it in, it can go from like 20% to 100 in an hour. It is super fast, and that is certainly nice, because that's really more what you want anyways, is that the batteries aren't going to get much better or much bigger, so instead charging the batteries faster, even if you are charging them once a day or twice a day or 3 times a day, is better. if all the rumors are true that the Switch 2 is going to be bigger, it's probably going to have a larger battery in it, so 60 watts might very well just balance it out. Excuse me as I pour water from one glass into the other, so I don't rattle around ice. But yeah, the 60 watts from 45 may keep the charge time to be about the same amount of time. I don't know how long it takes to charge a Switch from 0 to 100 at the moment, but I can tell you for kids it's going to be too long no matter what the amount of time is. My complaint about the dock, I think more than anything though, would be that it just kind of doesn't do anything. It noticeably doesn't have a lot of extra USB ports or Ethernet ports or M.2 slots for extra storage. So when you can consider what you can get for a Steam Deck, as far as something that might have 4 to 6 USB ports on it, 1 Ethernet port, it's possible there might be one out there with 2 Ethernet ports even, an NVMe spot to put in extra storage, possibly a micro SD slot to put in slower extra storage, yeah, possibly a HDMI out, possibly a DVI out. There's definitely a lot of room there for improvement. I don't know if they're really going to use the Thunderbolt branding anymore, but like, it is possible that a new Steam Deck could come out with even more powerful connectors on it, which it definitely could do with having a secondary connector, and with a more powerful Thunderbolt compatible or USB Gen 4, I believe it is, you could have even more devices with more bandwidth connecting to it to do perhaps something even more. It is worth mentioning that no third-party Nintendo Switch dock ever caught my attention. I imagine that's because the Nintendo Switch is so proprietary that it really can't do much. It probably doesn't have drivers to plug in different kinds of devices into it. So, yeah. Unlike the Steam Deck, which has a whole bunch of competitive different different docks sold by different companies, we really just didn't see a lot of enthusiasm for that for the Switch. I imagine we won't see that for the rest of the Switch 2 either. Moving on, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet players can catch an extremely rare shiny for 2 weeks only, which, I question how many people are still playing Scarlet and Violet. They definitely are dragging out Scarlet and Violet because they don't have another Pokemon game really ready to release, and I never really heard major patching and improvements on Scarlet and Violet. The pressure definitely is on as far as the mainline Pokemon games, and once the Switch 2 comes out, the pressure will even be higher for Pokemon games to be top tier, top quality games, which they have not been since going to 3D. They've struggled to be good quality, which is in part why Palworld gained some fandom there. Let's see, Stalker 2's first major patch is now out live with over 1,800 fixes. That sounds like a lot of fixes, certainly. But certainly I could see ways in which you could pad out the number of fixes And generally speaking, you wouldn't want to admit that your game has 1,800 bugs or over 1,800 bugs. I'm also saying AI issues here, where I feel like video games at this point have to stop using AI as a descriptor. Even if that was the descriptor they were using in the past, even if it is the most accurate descriptor, I think video gamers and game developers are going to have to create a different term for whatever the concept that they are trying to use there is. AI in the past was how you would program an NPC to behave, to act. And so you might have to just call it NPC logic, or just call it logic improvements in general, instead of calling it artificial intelligence. Game logic, player, NPC logic, player logic. I think logic issues in general. Again, a lot of people would be better off just not going into details and saying the new patch is out and it's fixed a bunch of things. Only name things that people are actively complaining about already. Let's see. Sony is now Kadokawa's largest shareholder, but it has not acquired the company yet. Generally, my understanding on how these takeovers go, whether they are labeled as hostile or otherwise, is that you have to own a controlling share of the voting stock of a company. Then you have to call shareholders meetings. Then you have to call for, during the shareholders meetings, for the company like Kadokawa to accept a buyout offer that would have been already submitted, or not. So it is kind of this two-sided attack where legally Sony is going to send a buyout offer to Kadokawa, while also legally buying out all the voting stock of a public company to force Kadokawa to vote on that. And maybe there's some internal rules that says the board has to approve it, and the board doesn't have to listen to the controlling shareholders, and maybe there's some more elements there where you would have to slowly, as the controlling shareholder, eliminate members of the board or dissolve the board in one fell swoop. But yeah, there's a few more steps around it. But I do think there's a decent chance that Sony just has enough money still to do that. And that'll be probably a shame if Sony does acquire Kadokawa, because I imagine Sony's not going to be as focused into its live action films and TV dramas as much as Kadokawa itself would be focused on that. So there will be a few projects, I imagine, that would get scrapped, and probably layoffs. Not sure that this acquisition has as much of a focus around video games, though, as much as it is just Sony trying to acquire companies, because Sony cannot grow and cannot succeed on its own. It's become too big effectively to produce anything. Too much red tape, which, yeah, if Kadokawa gets acquired, same problem will probably occur. Steam Replays Live, we've already looked at mine. Spent way too much time on that. Let's see. Xbox is reportedly developing a cross-platform user interface. Inspired by Battle.net, which, yeah, I suppose that should have been the case always. It's kind of weird it isn't the case that when you do go to the Microsoft Store, the Xbox Store on Windows PC, it isn't 100% the same interface as what going to Xbox would be on a console. So yeah, it may take them a while to get around to finishing a new interface, and it may not be a particularly good interface when all is said and done. Don't know if there's too much more to say there. Game Awards broke the viewership records with 115.4 million live streams. Yep. It did occur to me that this award, which they use this imagery, but you really don't actually see the real awards in the Game Awards at all. And then they use this symbol, and that doesn't really mean anything either. But yeah, there's certainly a question here: is this supposed to be Icarus flying too close to the sun, or is this supposed to just be a generic Angel or ripoff of the Emmys and Oscars? Is this even supposed to be a female or a male? Yeah, it's hard to tell. But yeah, Game Awards still, particularly this year, as blatant as always as far as just being ads. I'm not really caring about that. I did watch a YouTuber talk about how we should really stop expecting the Game Awards to be anything more, because it's been 10 years now. I think this was their 10-year anniversary. They didn't even make a big deal about it, apparently. But yeah, it's been about a decade, and they really haven't improved in the direction of actually celebrating games. And there are several other award shows that are more like live streams that just aren't talked about by mainstream video game journalists. And so inherently we've created, or I personally have created, this catch-22 where I have not actively gone and sought out these other award shows. And since only mainstream video game journalists vote at the Game Awards, they're self-promoting by only talking about the Game Awards. So things like the Streamies, which is one I've heard about this year, should be something I should have thought about and looked at more of if I'm going to watch any Game Award show. So yeah, I should probably broaden my focus and see if any of these Game Awards are worth it. Although a lot of these Game Award shows are just going to be like Giant Bomb's NVIDIA Game Awards, where it's really just some website promoting their own opinions. So I would eliminate those as viable award shows. You need to have multiple different people as judges, not just one company's internal award shows. And it very well is likely the case that award shows just don't matter in the first place, if it's not a People's Choice Awards in the first place. It probably doesn't matter. Notably, places like Blue Sky, Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, like none of them are succeeding well enough to have their own Game Awards. Or like maybe Twitch was involved with the Streamies at some point. I'm not sure. But yeah, it's kind of funny there isn't a YouTube in general Game Awards, that there isn't a Twitch Game Awards or anything like that. Maybe they just don't want to pick favorites. But yeah, certainly is some thoughts there as far as different ways award shows can go. And yeah, it will be very much the case if there is a different kind of award show. It's going to be like the Cannes International Film Festival or something like that, where it's going to be much smaller than something like the Emmys or the Oscars. in the Game Awards. It's just going to be the obnoxiously over-budgeted Game Awards always. The Nintendo Switch year in the review is now available too. And I think that is all of the Video Games Chronicle stories. I think we got them all. Now, that being said, I do believe that the Gematsu articles may have been missed here, because I have only 5 tabs open, and that seems like way too few tabs. Yeah. So let's come over here. I have Ys Proud Nordics announced. So let's scroll down until we see that. I don't even see it on this page. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on every single article on the first page. Opening each of these. That shouldn't be too big of a deal. I'm going to open that as a new page. And then let's see, do we see Ys Proud Nordics announced here? Yes. So I'm going to click on each of these. Okay. And that should fix that. Or at least it should mostly fix that. Things might be out of order here. Probably are. Sniper combat simulation game, Center Mass Streets of Ramadai. Ramadan? I don't know how. Ramadi, I would have to say is how you pronounce it. It's been announced for PC. Not gonna bother to try and get any Steam links opened from them. For Sonic Hedgehog film announced. Game called Off is coming to the Switch and Steam in 2025 with new features. Apparently this was on something else. There's a freeware RPG built in RPG Maker 2003 and released for PC in 2008, so it's a particularly old game. Yeah, and from the looks of it, it doesn't look particularly that interesting to me, but it is doing something interesting in that it is pushing itself to be released on Steam again and be released on the Switch with new features. A Slitterhead demo is now available, which is probably something it needed from day one. It is kind of a weird game, and I definitely think it probably would have convinced a few more people to buy the game had there been a demo. The PC version is also discounted right now to $34.99, which is probably closer to what it's worth. Hunter x Hunter Ninjax Impact launches in the summer of 2025. They've put out a lot of press releases for this game. That was one of the Hulu animes I thought about potentially watching. A lot of these are starting to feel like obligation watches, though, more than things I actually want to watch, in that there are video games based off of them, so it might be helpful to be more informed as to the source material. Samurai Maiden shipments and digital sales have topped 100,000, which is interesting because this definitely feels like a game that would not really reach those numbers, and it definitely, I think, has taken a long time to reach those numbers. When did it release? Do they have an actual date? launched on December 8th. What year worldwide? Because if it sold 50,000 units in December 11th of 2022, so I'd have to assume it either launched December 8th, 2022, or it launched years before that. So it is kind of crazy to be celebrating something that took 2 years to sell 100,000 units. But it is notably also a niche game. I remember it. This is the one where you have the Yuri girl-on-girl lesbian vibes, and I believe it is more of an Onichambra style hack and slash samurai girl thrown back in time. And yeah, she has partners that she partners up with, and they give her special energy boost and movements. I think it is all very light in what it actually shows. I don't think there's actually any real kissing, even, let alone nudity or anything like that. There isn't a lot of mainstream lesbian games in the gaming world. Yeah, with some rare exceptions where there's like one bit of DLC in Horizon that makes a protagonist who is assumed to be straight a lesbian. Yeah, there's nobody where it just kind of starts that way and is that way the whole time, so it is weird that there is this large gap there, and Samurai Maiden might be the most mainstream game with lesbian overtones, and it's not promoted, and they just don't have the publishing and the promotion there to get it over 100,000 sales in a reasonable amount of time. And there's definitely some weirdness to that. Although, it's also worth pointing out that there are characters in, like, Last of Us, I believe, that are lesbians, but it's not really eroticized, so that there is a big difference, where Samurai Maiden, it definitely is going with an erotic element that something like Last of Us Part 2 would not have in it also. And I think that's probably the thing that is slowing down sales more than everything, is we gamers as an audience have not been really encouraged to purchase games that have erotic elements or romance elements in them at all. It has been 100%, particularly in the United States, to push violence as the only thing you care about in video games, whereas any kind of love, any kind of familia, I was gonna say, is not even really mentioned. There aren't even that many games. In the old days, there would have been games where a brother or sister was kidnapped and you were going to save that brother or sister. You don't even get that very often these days. Moving on, the Utawaro Mono trilogy is set for Switch, has been delayed to February 27th in Japan, and the individual releases have been delayed to April 24th. So, I will say this year we really haven't seen that many extra delays, particularly from Japanese developers. I think the pressure to hit a specific date was already so low that when Japanese developers announced the release date, it was so far in the future that they finally kind of were able to give realistic release dates and stick to them. Venus Vacation Prism Dead or Alive Extreme has detailed its mini games and the photographic functions. You can play hand sumo, splash water, etc. Sounds all very simplistic, and it is certainly a case. where the where the focus definitely has not been around the mini games. I'm not sure what hand sumo would be called in the West. I'm sure that there's probably something similar to that, but I'm not aware of it. But yeah, it doesn't seem too different from the general concept of sumo wrestling and pushing people, and yeah. And there's a whole bunch of pictures here showing off photograph mode. But yeah. It's really just going to be a QuickTime event thing, so not much. I'm not sure Splashwater is much of anything either. They definitely put no thought in having an actual game like beach volleyball this time. And I imagine all the photograph mode, that's pretty awful looking to my eye. I imagine the photograph mode is all just for the next Dead or Alive fighting game, which is the only reason they're even really making this game, is to experiment on bumping up the visuals. Although, even in that, because the body types of the different ladies are all almost exactly the same, it doesn't really make me very enthusiastic for this game, nor there being that much variety in different body types in the next Dead or Alive fighting game. You have an interesting contrast here in that Fate Stay Night Remaster sales have topped 100,000, this being achieved in 4.5 months, which is still a rather long time compared to AAA game launches, but it really is apples to oranges comparisons. It is also worth mentioning that the translation originally was fairly criticized for the Fate Stay Night, in that like entire lines of dialogue were being attributed to the wrong characters, and that at times the wrong characters were popping up to speak versus what was supposed to be said. Perhaps they tweaked and fixed all of that. Fate Stay Night in particular was the beginning of the whole Fate Stay series, which is a huge series, very long, lots of spin-offs, and so it being remastered is a big deal. It being released on Steam is a big deal, but it is still very much for a niche audience, obviously, in that you're talking 100,000 people, dedicated loyal fans. And yeah, that probably is the best way to think of gamers as a community, is that it is just potentially 34 million people, each divided into groups of about 100,000 people. So would that be 3,400 different groups of 100,000 people? Maybe my math is somewhere off there, but yeah. But yeah, that probably is the best way to think of gamers, is that there on rare occasions are games that get over 100,000 sales, but not that many. Which, if your best bet is that you're going to get over 100,000 sales and you're selling a game for $60, then you know that your gross income is only going to be $6 million. Cut that into about half with all the expenses, and you're going to have a gross income of really closer to $3 million. So the reality of the situation is, if you want to make a game, a video game, you need to spend just about $1.5 million at most to develop a game, and well, really probably closer to $1 million to develop a game, and then potentially $1 million to advertise and publish a game. And yeah, that'll leave you with $1 million extra to develop your next game. And so yeah, on average, that's your best bet scenario. That's where you should be thinking, which highly contrasts with what Sony and Microsoft are thinking, and Ubisoft and EA, who are probably spending millions more than $1 million in the development of games, and then demanding such incredibly high sales to make up for that. And definitely some games work that way. Established games like Call of Duty definitely work that way, but most games, no. Your best bet, make $1 million or spend $1 million or less to make a game in the hopes that you get 100,000 sales. Of course, that's the kind of sales that Nintendo and Sony and Microsoft would all scoff at too. Of course, it is also worth mentioning, when you're talking visual novels like Fate Stay Night, you would struggle to spend $1 million to make a game like that. You'd have to pay artists a lot of money to animate things to spend $1 million. You would have to pay voice actors a lot of money to voice act things, and you would have to pay programmers a lot more money than usual to program and script the dialogue. And that's kind of it. After that, it would just be promotion and advertising. Like, yeah, you would really struggle to spend $1 million making a visual novel, regardless of how long the visual novel is. I mean, if the dialogue went too long and it was a 400-hour visual novel, then most players wouldn't even want to play that game. So you can't go too big. Anyways, Triggerheart Excelia Enhanced for the Switch launches April 24th, 2025 in Japan. This might be yet another game that doesn't come out to the West because they just know it wouldn't get approved for the West. A roguelike action game called Disorder launches January 22nd, 2025 for the PS5, Xbox Series, and PC. It's from the Korean developer Grumpy. I've never heard of Grumpy, although we are seeing kind of a pattern here from Korean developers in that they like the skin tight suits of the characters showing off the form. And yeah, this apparently has been age restricted, so can't even play the video if I was wanting to. But yeah, we'll see how much coverage this game gets and how popular it potentially is. Yasha Legends of the Demon Blade launches April 24th, 2025. This might be an example today of where Japanese developers in particular don't really take a break during Christmas, and they don't celebrate Christmas that much. They don't take a whole week off, I'm sure. And so that might be why we're getting announcements for things coming out right now. Bushy Road Games and Frontwing announce a visual novel called Perennial Dusk Kinsenka. Yeah. So yeah, another visual novel. Resetna launches January 31st for the Switch and PC, and in Q1 2025 for PS5 and Xbox Series. It's a side-scrolling Metroidvania game, apparently. Yeah, very interesting to just have announcements coming out right now. Genshin Impact version 5.3 update is launching January 1st. Cutting it very close. So I guess what we're doing is we're playing a game today to see who is willing to announce closest to December 25th. And so far, Genshin Impact update is winning. Any Christmas updates for something like Genshin Impact, I imagine, would already be out and would last the entirety of from now to January 1st. Ys Proud Nordics has been announced. It's a significantly upgraded Ys 10 Nordics due out in 2025 in Japan. I didn't realize that the Ys series was remastering itself, though. But apparently it needed it. Trails of the Sky first chapter launches in the fall of 2025 worldwide for the PS5, Switch, and PC. And then I guess the question is, did we open all of these? What page is this? This is page 2 of Gematsu. I'm gonna assume yes, I did. And this is probably where it messed up before. Let's see, To the Moon, Sigmund Minisodes 1 and 2 are now available for the PS5, and they're coming to the Xbox Series and Switch in early in 2025. Yeah. We have yet to see any real indication that one of the consoles is getting left out more than usual. It is still very much the case that a lot of Japanese companies don't bother to release on the Xbox, but very commonly we are seeing things get released for either the Switch and PC, or the Switch and PS5, or the Switch and PS5 and PC, or even the PS4 instead of the PS5 in those combinations. It would have to be fairly obvious if we started to see only releases for Switch and PC. The biggest trend I've noticed is just a slight increase on PC releases. Let's see, Neptunia Riders vs. Doggo's digital pre-orders are open January 2nd, 2025. The Switch version DLC swimsuit costume set has been cancelled. This again, I imagine, is censorship happening for the Switch for the West, but possibly also seems like it's worldwide that the swimsuit costume set has just been cancelled. There is a danger here, certainly, in that companies may start announcing games with DLC costume sets that they know are just never going to be approved, and then they don't actually make them. And so there's a real danger of a bait and switch there. I don't think that's really the case with the Neptunia series. I do think that the Neptunia series swimsuit costume set would have been fairly tame anyways, in that it would have been fairly normal, probably mostly two-piece bikinis, the swimsuits that you would have seen on the beach, not anything super extreme like really tiny micro bikinis or anything like that, or thong bikinis or anything like that. But yeah, we definitely are seeing that Nintendo is once again censoring their games, and in particular there's at least a couple of Japanese game developers that's the kind of games they make, so that they are very much in danger and are going to have to jump to PC only. But even there, they're struggling to not be censored on Steam, and yeah, the divide certainly is is getting wider between, can you make a lewd game and get it on Steam, or do you, if your company makes lewd games or that show even a little bit of skin, are you going to be forced to sell on adult only sites like Nitaku, or have your own sites to sell them from? Yeah. And it definitely seems like that's the case, is that we may get to a point where Neptunia series are only purchasable from their own websites, or from third-party sites. Moving on, the Famitsu sales from the 9th to the 15th have been updated on Gamatsu. So let's see what we've got here. We've got Nintendo Switch dominating the first 10 without a single new game. Then Nintendo Switch dominating the next 9 without anything new changing it. And then it's all the way to the 20th spot that you have Dragon Quest III HD 2D Remake, and then Nintendo Switch dominating the rest of the chart. Wow. So I do think we probably have seen 30 listings that all are Nintendo Switch before, but it is even then a rarity. It is still very shocking to say that the Switch, which everybody assumes is going to be backward compatible with the Switch 2, or forward compatible with the Switch 2, just so prevalently dominating. Only one game on the list in Japan, even for the PS5, and it's a Dragon Quest game, which I would assume, yes, Dragon Quest for the Switch, also available in the second spot. So yeah, it's not even an exclusive. So definitely in Japan you can see how it's Switch and maybe PC only, the PC sales not being taken up by Famitsu, and I think that's something Famitsu probably should do starting next year. These are mostly old games, and it definitely gives you an idea as far as if Christmas presents are being bought in Japan, that they are being bought probably for younger people, probably for kids, younger kids that are still playing the Switch. It may very well be the case that the Switch 2 comes out and it's just hard to get, or just not really that much of an upgrade, so it may be that sales numbers for the next Nintendo Switch are fairly slow compared to the massive sales numbers that the current Switch has. You can see the 3 models of the Switch, the original, the Lite, and the OLED model, taking the top 3 spots, with PlayStation 5 not even being able to beat the original Switch. If you combine the PS5 Pro and PS5 Digital Editions, you get to about 20,000, which would beat the original Switch, but not the Switch Lite. And the overall numbers here are well over half as far as total sales compared to the total sales combined Switch sales. It's not even half, is it? No, because you add all this up and you get barely 6 million, and there's 20 million original units sold, plus another 6 million lights, plus another 8 million OLED models. Yeah, it definitely is an also-ran. And certainly, in contrast, that just makes things like the Xbox Series X, which has no expectations on it, look so much better. And it does just seem like it's a good thing, even when only 1,219 units of an Xbox Series X Digital Edition are sold. These numbers are probably all foreigners, pretty much, in Japan, not actual Japanese people buying Xboxes. But yeah, any number that even slightly approaches PS5 looks good to Microsoft, like Microsoft's making some progress. PS4s selling only 47 units, so it definitely means there's very few actually available. I did watch a YouTuber doing one of the gacha style arcades that are in Japan. There's a lot of them. And one of the major winning prizes that they were giving out were Switches and Switch games. So, yeah, it definitely is a popular prize right now that people still really want as far as Switches go. Yeah, you'd have to have a lot of Switches, frankly, to hit a saturation point where a kid would not be happy to get a Switch. Because there's just enough of a backlog of games. They're easy enough to get now, too. And you can't count that out, frankly, but I definitely would want a Switch right now because I could probably get cheap used copies of Switch games that are good compared to wanting a PS5, which even if I could get used copies of games I wanted to play, there just aren't that many out there. It would just be like Spider-Man and Last of Us and Horizon. That's kind of it. Astrobot, yeah. I can only really think of 4 or 5 games I'd even want to play on a PlayStation 5. I'd mostly be buying a PlayStation 5 just to be a Blu-ray player, really. And if I'm going to do that, I can definitely wait 2 or 3 more years before I buy a PlayStation 5 just to be a Blu-ray player. And frankly, you could probably get a Xbox One or a PS4 to be a Blu-ray player a lot cheaper anyways. Moving on, Sword of the Necromancer Resurrection launches January 23rd, 2025. I feel like this is an old game being re-released, remade. Definitely recall seeing it. The King of Fighters 13 Global Match is coming to PC on February 20th, 2025. It's currently only available for the PS4 and Switch, so it makes me feel like it's kind of a older game. Sony Group Corporation and Kara Corporation have formed a strategic capital and business alliance. I guess that's what led to Kadokawa Corporation being largely held by Sony Group. But again, here's a great example of the games that Kadokawa, I imagine, makes. Is you have a Sword Art Online game, I believe this is it wrong to pick up Strangers in a Dungeon anime-based game. You have Danganronpa. You have another anime-based game. I can't remember the name of that anime. You have what I think is Elden Ring. And then you have a game I couldn't even place, but almost certainly is also based on an anime. Yeah. Whereas Sony Interactive Entertainment, at least in the past few years, has not been particularly interested in promoting any kind of anime games at all. It just doesn't feel like any of those games are going to get a lot of support, a lot of promotion, particularly in the West. Yeah, the 6 games I just mentioned, none of which for the PS5 are anime-based games. And none of those games, if they are anime-based games, really need the power of the visual rendering that the PS5 can do, because path tracing, ray tracing, DLSS, all of the upscaling stuff, it's not likely to really improve 2D animation much at all. So I would assume that if Sony did fully own these, they would not get anywhere as much support as they probably deserve. Although there is also an argument that maybe there's too many Sword Art Online games already, and the expectations are too high for those types of games anyways. But they keep getting made, so they must sell, at least in Japan, somewhat. Moving on, Ys Memories of Calcetta is coming to Switch in spring of 2025 in Japan. It's currently available for PS4, PC, and PS Vita. For it to be available for the Vita, it must be particularly old. Alright, and I would assume this is page 3, and I would assume that we had already talked about all of these stories. Oh. Yeah, I'm just gonna assume we already talked about all of these stories. Okay, and then that's gonna bring us to Gaming on Linux, which again, I see only about 5 articles from Gaming on Linux open today, but I wouldn't be surprised if that isn't because we've already yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if there's not really that much to be said today. So I'm just going to scroll down here just in case I miss any of these headlines, just to show them very quickly, and then move on. So, Tactical Breach Wizards has a beta with improvements for gamepad and Steam Deck verification. I saw a YouTuber who found a couple of programs to allow you to control all of Windows. It looked like Windows 11 with an Xbox controller. Everything including the user account control pop-ups, a pop-up Xbox specific keyboard, and logging in when the computer reboots or when USB drivers update or things like that, Wi-Fi drivers update. So you're basically installing a free program that is getting administrative access, but it was an interesting video, and it is kind of crazy that that's not just integrated into Windows in the first place. That your mileage would vary drastically though, and because what you're effectively trying to do there is have a Steam machine that's running Windows 11, and I don't know why you would want a Steam machine that is running Windows 11, although it would be interesting to see what the experience is like on Bakelite Linux, for instance, or SteamOS, as far as can you go from a cold boot all the way into a game using a controller only, an Xbox controller only. You probably can, though it's probably better thought out that way. Gamepad controllers, though, have been around forever, so it's kind of crazy that Windows doesn't have that stuff set up. If I was going to do the same thing, I would have probably used the wrong software when all is said and done. But yeah, there is a future there. I could see a lot of kiosk devices also having do-it-yourself type kiosks where you control it with an Xbox controller, like smart boards in classrooms and stuff where you control it with a controller instead of weird air mouses or having to pull out a wireless mouse and keyboard. Once you get into professional kiosks, though, they often have built-in functionality to kind of just automatically get things set up depending on how interactive you want your kiosk to be. Most kiosks are like digital sales signs behind a McDonald's where you don't want it to be particularly interactive or not at all. But yeah. Whereas putting a controllers on something is less of a kiosk, more of a smart board thought. Anyways, I feel like I'm rambling here. Let's move on. There's a demo for Comet Force. If you want to check that out on Gaming on Linux. Fedora Asahi Remix 41 brings AAA games to Apple Silicon with Linux. We had already talked about that one. Nexus Mods cross-platform app. It's been released. That's old news too. So, yeah, it does feel like I potentially already did talk about everything. Maybe this is where my macro broke too. That's a possibility. It's that this page here is the Steam page for Gaming on Linux. So perhaps it tried to click on something that was Steam based, thinking it was a link to a Steam game, and that threw everything off. And we already talked about the Godot show reel. But I will say, I am a little bit more enthusiastic around the Godot block coding element in the show reel. While I still don't like the idea of block coding, I think it is probably worth the trade-off to get younger kids into using the Godot engine quicker than to not have it. Like, it's better to have block coding as a crutch to get into Godot using the Godot engine than to have kids who have already probably coded with block coding before and then throw them in to a completely different style of programming that they would be fairly uncomfortable with. Although, really, if I had a choice, I would just never teach kids block coding in the first place. Like, it's not helpful in the long run. Like, most crutches are not helpful in the long run. Alright, well then that's going to bring us to GameDeveloper.com articles, and I doubt too many of these are new either. Since my macro is still broken here, the newest articles are likely not going to be here. That being said, they may not have really posted anything too new either. Started watching a YouTuber covering board games, different Hasbro, Parker Brothers re-releases of board games, comparing the old versions to the new versions, which is interesting to kind of expand my understanding of entertainment. It's not directly video game related, so something slightly different. WB Games laying off 99 developers. I think we had already talked about that. Almost feels like they intentionally didn't want it to go to 3 digits. Let's see. But I mean, you still could easily say about 100 developers. Then the rest of these stories I think are particularly old. So, don't think we'll really need to cover them. The fact that you can lay off 100 developers of a game, and then inherently a lot of games would be lucky to get 100,000 units sold. It is an oddly low ratio in my mind of 1,000 to 1 as far as game developers finding people to purchase it. But think about it from this perspective. If you made something with your own hands, could you personally find 1,000 people willing to buy it particularly for $60. I think the vast majority of people would say no. No, I guess maybe there are ways in which you probably are doing that. If you're working at McDonald's, for instance, you very well may be making burgers, and 60 burgers in a day, selling them for $1. In contrast, if you're an office worker, you may be just pushing paper around and not selling anything directly to anybody. But yeah, if you were just left alone, where you had to do all the promotion and all the publishing and all the shipping and delivery, yeah, most people I think would struggle to find 1,000 people to sell to, which is weird because inherently, again, the likes of Microsoft and Ubisoft and Sony and Nintendo, when they make their AAA games, when they make their quadruple A games, they are expecting millions of people to buy them for the effort that was put into by just a few hundred people. And I guess inherently that is the way everything should work. It's just it doesn't always work out that way, and it rarely works out that way. YouTube content creators are probably a great example of that too. Whereas for every single video I make, I definitely know I'm not getting 1,000 people to even watch the videos, let alone in any way pay anything more than their time to watch the videos. So yeah, and I'm not alone there. Even the biggest of YouTubers, I don't think, are likely getting 1,000 of their viewers to subscribe to anything like a $60 a video Patreon. I would be asking quite a lot. Or watch $60 worth of ads. Anyways, let's go ahead and go through all the new games on Steam. Now, again, I'm gonna have to be careful here. Omnius is here, so I'm gonna assume that this one, this one, this one, this one, and this one, all the way to the top, are not open. Which means when I get to these games, it will not be curated for any inappropriate content, and so I need to be a little careful about what I click on. Potentially will not be loaded all the way up either. Almost done. I don't suspect, maybe I already said this, but that we'll have less games that come out ever. If there is a slight difference there, it's going to be very slight. Unless it's a case that those secret people who control whether games get released or not on Steam inside of Valve just take the days off, and so that is assuming that games in general need manual approval. I don't think most games do trigger any need for manual approval. I think it is really only the honest games that say they should be in the adult section that have anime characters in it tend to get locked behind any kind of manual checks. Whereas your asset flip garbage games seem to get released without any problems. Which I would guess is probably a case where they could make an argument at very least that they're only manually checking for things that might cause controversy or give Valve a bad name. The battle for Christmas here is kind of a great example of something that's particularly for Christmas. I think Christmas games need to come out December 1st. I think you need to have that long lead time there. I don't think you put it out on the 20th for Christmas being the 25th every year. And I definitely don't think you put out things any earlier than, say, after Black Friday, if you were going to go really early for Christmas games. And then I'll give that a chance. Oh, did that actually? Oh no, I might be signed out here. There is an argument to be made that I should just give up with the follow list concept, or that I should go specifically and eliminate just everything on my follow list after this year and start over on January 1st. Which is not the worst idea, although it would be fairly unfair for games that just came out. Yeah, I don't think I want putrid ponies. But yeah, certainly I could do a faultless cleanup, and now would be the time to do a faultless cleanup in most cases when things should be fairly slow. Although I'm not sure in my life if Christmas, New Year's is particularly a slow period of time. I'm not sure if it really is the case for most people. It's a slow time in that you're not really doing the same things you normally do, but then you're being usually asked to do something completely different, several different things during the Christmas season, often things that you particularly may not want to do, or things that are just going to be time consuming. It would be, in my mind, interesting if everybody took 1 year off of Christmas and just broke the habit to see what they really enjoyed of the activities and which of the activities they don't enjoy. Because a lot of it does definitely feel like obligation based. Yeah. Superhero market. I'm gonna say no to that. I'll give a stargazing VR game a follow. That's an interesting thought, at least. These look like interesting enemies at the very least. Some of these already on the fall list. So the fall list still does play a role. It's not just a dumb concept. It prevents me from making too many copies of the YouTube shorts, which I do need to make some YouTube shorts, more just to close tabs. Real Pharmacy Simulator. Yeah. Not surprised, though, that the vast majority of this just does not feel like much. It does, to me, feel like we are getting closer to the end than we normally would be, so wouldn't be surprised if there's actually not that many games. Well, it's kind of out of season for a horror game, but it does look good. Better quality than most. It's interesting to see how slow the low effort copycats are for something like Supermarket Simulator, where that is something that has been around for, well, long enough to establish itself. And then it is also certainly surprising that you don't have any medium or low effort, high effort copycats very often. Because yeah, there definitely is a case where if Devolver Digital wanted to, they could make a Supermarket Simulator game that's just as good, if not better. But perhaps that just takes too long to actually develop, and perhaps that is just not worth their effort. Can't even tell what this is, what kind of game this is. It's so single color palette, or too many bright colors of different colors. I think it's a top-down flying in the clouds game. That might be an example of a game that in movement is much easier to see. And we just had 3 hidden object games all in a row there, probably from the same publisher. There's a danger as more and more people lose jobs as far as retail stores go. Although, who knows, maybe retail stores might come back. There's a danger here that there's just going to be this false nostalgia of kids who played video games that simulated working in a retail store versus people who actually did work in a retail store and knows the real horrors of that. Because inherently, you're not dealing with crazy people, you're not dealing with irate people, you're not dealing with schemers and scammers and shoplifters in these video games. And you're not dealing with crazy schemers and scammers also in the case of your boss in video games. And you're not dealing with a situation where it may very well just be balanced in such a way that you can't actually ever succeed, which is often the case. When being employed, you're just not getting enough pay, you're not getting enough hours. There's all kinds of things they're doing to dock pays, take tips, or just in some other way exploit you. Yeah, I wouldn't really encourage kids to be indoctrinated into this religious worship of working low skill, entry level style jobs that tend to exploit quite often. Let's see if this reloads. Well, if this doesn't load, I'm assuming that that's probably not worth making a YouTube short on it. Yeah. Oh no. I'm not what else you could do though for kids in particular. Because yeah, I don't know what the best experience. I mean, you give them a fantasy retail work experience, you're just deluding them and leading them to worshiping that experience or appreciating that experience more than they should. You give them a real world experience, perhaps that's the better thing. Certainly, and there's some games like that, but they're not particularly fun as video games. I guess that's why I generally say I don't like video games where you're just simulating somebody doing a job, because jobs are not games and jobs are not fun all the time. You're lucky if they're fun even some of the time, frankly. Alright, well, yeah, that did feel like there was slightly fewer games this stream that came out on Steam. Perhaps that's because my macro broke and it just didn't open up everything. I wouldn't be surprised if Monday the macro's broken in the opposite direction and it opens up a ton of duplicate things. Anyways, that's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on watching. Thanks.